Tuesday Drive.
And, of course, you just heard James Brown there from 1977 with People, Wake Up and Live, which I thought was an appropriate song for our fun fact today. As I mentioned to you before, it was on this day back in 1962, the United Nations announces that Earth's population has hit 3 billion people. But as I also said to you, I did a bit of research and found out that in 2018, we were just shy of 7.6 billion people. It's 24 to 6, and look, I want to get a little bit personal with you, Shoalhaven. Do you keep a diary? What do you write in it? Is it as rudimentary as your tasks and appointments for the day, or do you find you're still some more time away, or maybe once a week, and pour your emotions onto the page? Now, don't worry, this isn't our talkback segment for the afternoon, so you don't need to tell me, but would you be surprised if I mentioned that this COVID-19 pandemic that we're all living through is bringing a resurgence in the humble diary? Joining me to discuss this further is Dr Peta Murray, a postdoctoral research fellow at RMIT University, who's been looking into this a little further. Hello, and welcome to Tuesday Drive.
Thank you very much.
It is a pleasure. So where did we find you this afternoon?
You find me on the beautiful surf coast of Victoria, and you may also find me with the yapping dogs in the background because it's happy hour for my dogs here. There's kangaroos in the area, and at this time of the afternoon there's often a little bit of extra ambient noise, so apologies if that comes through. No,
not at all. It actually sounds like we'd be pretty used to it because the south coast here in New South Wales, of course, we have lots of kangaroos hopping around. So no, bring it on, Peter, bring it on.
I know your part of the world very well. It's a beautiful part of New South Wales.
Thank you very much. Now, how did you find that diaries are becoming quite popular again?
Well, there's lots of definitions of diary when we talk about this. So most of your listeners are probably thinking about the old school paper diary that many of us keep, just as a matter of fact, as an appointment noter, as you mentioned, and also the kinds of diaries that are given to kids as presents when they're young to sort of get them writing more frequently. But we've broadened the definition of diaries, and in this COVID time, there's been a lot of social logging, I suppose, or invitations to people to log their experiences in more communal diary form. So there's a lot of online initiatives that people are invited to contribute to, both in Australia and overseas. And we see this as being a diaristic impulse that people are responding to. But we also see it as an opportunity for people to, in a way, become public historians. We are living through something that, as we all hear regularly, is unprecedented. We don't have records of what it is to live through a pandemic in the 21st century. And so we're making that in the moment. And that's why there's so many efforts to reach out to people and invite them to participate in these kinds of initiatives.
So do you think the average person, when they hop onto, say, Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, actually appreciate that they are actually contributing to this online diary, as you mentioned?
Well, no, I don't think they do. I think that most of us now have been so kind of immersed in those social media platforms that we've forgotten that there is something of the diary in this sort of sharing of detail that's not necessarily always publicly made, or wasn't in the past. And we've loosened the boundaries, I think, a lot between what is public and what is private. And we've also learnt to curate our lives for the amusement of other people. So I think that's one kind of a diaristic expression, but it's not necessarily where we're going in terms of what we're looking at in our research. We're looking at people who are really developing their powers of noticing and are managing to capture detail and what is essentially data of this time. And we're also very interested in people who do commit to regularly going to some sort of a platform to capture something of their own experience against that canvas.
Now, is this research that you've undertaken since COVID-19, or have you actually been looking at this, before we even heard of the pandemic?
Oh, look, Stephen, we call ourselves the founders of the science of diarrhology.
Right.
And we are a research collective. We're 3 women based at RMIT, as you said. And our research collective is called the Symphony of Awkward. And it began about 3.5 years ago when one of our number, Dr Stacey Taylor, managed to realise that all 3 of us still had access to our girlhood diaries. Mm-hmm. And so Dr Kim Munro and myself and Dr Taylor set up this collective called the Symphony of Awkward. We were also aware around that time of a wave of public diary readings where celebrities overseas were getting up to share their childhood diaries. So there was something going on in the zeitgeist around that time. And it's just been a wonderful excursion ever since that's delivered us into this COVID moment with all of this understanding about the history and the practice of diary keeping. And now we're seeing it really take off again for very interesting reasons.
It's really interesting that you mentioned about, you had your sort of diaries from when you were young, because I was the same probably about 15, 16 years ago when I went into a new job, and it was an awful job, Peter, absolutely awful. I remember each day I'd come home practically in tears because I was just so upset, and I found myself writing pages a day about just how I was feeling, and by the end of it, for that night at least, I would feel a little bit better. Of course, when I went back to work, it was the same. But it was interesting. I stumbled across this about 10 years later, and I was just reading it all. I was just fascinated, about the way I was feeling. But then there were times, though, there were joyous times, of course, in my life as well, which I would document that as well. It was simply fascinating. And it's like, oh my goodness, yes, I've forgotten all about that until I'd read page 73.
I mean, it's wonderful to have that, isn't it? Photos serve some of those purposes, but they're not a window on your interior experience. And I think, the fact that you yielded to that urge to express the turmoil of that time was probably a very healthy thing to do. A diary is a safe way to talk to yourself. It's a safe way to reflect on who you've been and who you're trying to become. It can be an aspirational space. It can be used in all kinds of ways.
Now, with diary entry, are you encouraging people, especially through these sort of challenging times? I know we use that word so often, but are you sort of encouraging people to take up diary entries or start their own diary?
Oh, and I'm encouraging them to interpret that very loosely as well. It doesn't have to be a punishing regime where you slave away over an empty page. It can be making a note in your phone, a vocal note or a verbal note. The Symphony of Awkward and I had a little project earlier this year when we first went into lockdown where we would each capture 30 seconds of sound a day from the worlds that we've been living in and then braided those together a little bit later. So I think there's a lot of different ways to come at this. I think that in this time where the days of the week all blur and the months blur, anything that you can do to kind of mark time and distinguish this day from the next day and next week from the week after that is a valuable exercise. It does give you a sense that you are moving, you're not quite as stuck perhaps as you feel. So I feel like it's got a lot of value. And I think it's a wonderful thing too for people who are perhaps homeschooling children or whatever, as a way of extending writing and speaking practices.
So I just want to take you back to the fact, because I have never really even considered recording audio, and especially 30 seconds worth of audio. What were the types of sounds that you are sort of keeping there?
Oh, we had a fantastic time. We were able to look back at the archive of sound that we collected. So we did this for about 2 months, I suppose, 2 or 3 months. So we ended up having a bank of about 80 or maybe even more sounds. And some of them were nature sounds, and we all noticed how much more attuned we became to the different kinds of sounds of nature in our environments. 2 of us were in the metropolitan area, and one was away in the country, as it were. But there were also machine sounds, and there were domestic sounds, and there were the daily sounds of each of us going through our day. You know, I found myself recording the sound of changing the linen on the bed one day, or feeding the dogs, you know, those kinds of sounds. And it's just as much a diary as writing "I fed the dog" is into a notebook.
Now, I'm going to go right off topic here just for a second, Peter. It's only that you've just mentioned there making the bed. How do you go when it comes to folding your fitted sheets? Do you struggle with that?
I hate that.
Oh, thank goodness it's not just me. Thank you.
It's a form of torture.
I fear that if I was recording myself having an audio and I was trying to fold up the fitted sheet, there would be a lot of expletives on that audio recording.
Yes, I don't think I would take that snapshot. I think that's just... I mean, A, you're trying to manipulate your recording device at the same time, and you already need 4
oh, gosh, yes.
Sheet.
Tell me about it.
So it's not going to work.
Now, you've got I guess I'd like an event coming up too, I believe, on the 24th of September. What's that all about?
This is a fabulous initiative that's run by the Non-Fiction Lab at RMIT University, and that's non-flash fiction. So we look in both directions, at both fictional and factional, shall we say, things. And we've been running a series of online public-facing forums this year because we can't meet in public, and we've always had a public-facing series of talks and presentations through the year. So this year we're doing a program called How the Future Looks Now, and we're inviting different kinds of creative practitioners to speak to that subject. So we've had one on poetry, we've had one on speculative fiction, and we are about to do one on what can the diary do for us in troubled times. So we've got a number of diarologists, expert diarists with different kinds of practices who are going to come and share their practices with our audience, and then have a conversation about the value of this kind of commitment, I suppose, to making some sort of a record in these times.
And is it free to anybody?
It's free to anybody. There's an Eventbrite link, which is active at the moment, and it's called How the Future Looks Now is the name of the series. And if you want to follow up with me afterwards, I'm happy to share the link to the Eventbrite site.
Oh, that's great. Look, thank you so much for chatting with us this afternoon. So I found it fascinating. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
And go give those dogs a big pat for me.
I will. Okay. Lovely to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That was Dr Peta Murray, a postdoctoral research fellow at RMIT University. And isn't it funny that to think that all those posts that we make online are in a way a diary of our own making, and that maybe 500 years down the track we'll tell our future families just a little bit about who we were and where we were and how we lived and what we were thinking at the time. Now, of course, if you're interested in finding out more about the Symphony of the Awkward, I should say, and you can register your interest by heading to the eventbrite.com.au website and searching for what can the diary offer in troubled times. And it is a free event, and it's on the 24th of September.
This is Tuesday Drive.